So we're happy, as I said, to have members of the Aurora Police Department here today, including their chief of police. It surprised me this morning. I couldn't even believe that was an optical illusion. You know, we have new leadership in the department with Chief Cross and also our deputy chief, Matt Thomas. Wave your hand, Matt, over there. And I told the chief he had to make a few remarks this morning. He wasn't on my run the show, but you know, you surprised me. I'm gonna surprise you. So maybe let's start with that. Come on up, and then I'll do the other introductions here today.
I'll talk loud unless you need me. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. I appreciate Ms. Bright. I appreciate the sisters of Delta Sigma Theta and the Royal Police Department and CRB. Dr. Brown, I appreciate you guys getting this event together. Mental health is a very important issue that I think we need to educate the public and educate ourselves on. It's definitely something that not only affects our community, but also our officers. Sometimes the things that we see and the things that we experience, we have to do a better job of concentrating on our own mental wellness and health. So this is a very important topic to me, and I just appreciate the collaboration with all the organizations and look forward to a great event. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Chief Cross. So the chief has already done a shout out to my sorority sisters, the Glen Ellen Area Alumni Chapter, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. You know, this is a lifelong commitment to an international organization that's been at the forefront of civil rights and social action for nearly 110 years. That's what you see before you today. So we're happy to have you here today as Sorors in partnership with us. Coming out to Aurora, thank you. And in addition, we're also, we are happy to have a partnership also with NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. We'll hear from their executive director of the local chapter here today. Thank you so much for coming out. Right here, I'm looking out back there in front of me. And we have additionally someone from AID, which Dr. Brown, so as the chief mentioned, there are two people here today that I really want to highlight. One is Dr. Timothy Brown, who serves on the Civilian Review Board. He brings his expertise to the board, and he was instrumental in getting to identify who are the people that should be in the room when we have these conversations with the community. And so thank you, Dr. Brown. He told me he wasn't going to talk today, but I'm going to have to twist his arm a little bit because I need some help up here because this is clearly his area of expertise. I also want to mention and highlight someone else you're going to hear from today who's a member of the Glen Ellen Area Alumni Chapter. Her name is Katina Jenkins, who made a comment to me about her son, who's autistic, who basically, she probably may not realize, I've been following his life ever since he was a March of Dimes baby. And to see him thrive and now be, what, 13? Yeah, 13 years old, it's bigger now. She expressed some concerns to me, and this is the result of one citizen voicing concerns. And you see the turnout that you got, Katina. Everyone wants to make sure that this city has favorable outcomes for everyone, for those with mental health challenges, and anybody who's intellectually, has intellectual disabilities or challenges as well. So I hope you're reassured by what you see here today. Okay. So, so first of all, we are, as you know, we're in our first year of operation, and we're hopeful today that this will open a conversation. This is the first of what we hope is going to be a series of community conversations. Come on up here, Soror, anywhere. And I also want to recognize, since she's up here already, Nia McElroy, who is the chair of the Glen Ellen Area chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Social Action Committee. She has a tremendous responsibility because social action causes everything that Delta does. Everything we do can have an impact. And her job is a big one in the chapter. We truly appreciate you, Nia, and all that you do. Excuse me. So, anything else I need to mention today? I think I covered everything, hopefully, as the background.
Dispatching the social workers.
Well, I'm going to introduce them in a minute. Okay. Well, we have a cast of thousands from the Aurora Police Department. I couldn't be more pleased with the support that you've shown. It makes up for all the long hours, because everybody knows Tim Brown is an early bird. I had to show up at one meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, fully made up with clothes on. That was really hard. I was like, oh my God, this is rough. But so to see all of you this morning really is warms my heart, and I thank you so much. We have representatives from several units of the police department. In fact, Deputy Chief Thomas was saying, well, do you have all their logos? I was like, no, we don't have logos. But we have the Crisis Intervention Unit, members from that. We have as well the social workers are represented here today, as well as dispatch, community oriented police. And we also have a mental health perspective from NAMI, as I mentioned before, our representative from there. We have a representative also coming, who is Suzanne Williams from our sorority chapter, who I think I stopped by a train or something, is running late this morning. She's a speech and language pathologist person. So what I'm going to do, because I don't want to butcher anybody's name this morning, but I want us to go ahead and get started, is I'm going to have the first group, have you come up by group or whatever, and introduce yourself. We're going to start first with community perspective. And I'm going to call on you, if you would, to go ahead and provide your remarks to us today. Mia McElroy.
Thank you. I would do like Chief and put some bass in it. Yeah. We won't need to have a microphone. Thank you all so much for coming, recognizing this is Mental Health Month, and we are trying to shine a light on mental health issues, especially those that impact the community. I don't know if you're aware, there have been tragedies in other states. I'll share a little bit with you. In California, a 30-year-old Navy veteran had a negative interaction with law enforcement when he was experiencing a PTSD event. The law enforcement officers had no idea that was the situation they were being called to. In Utah, there's a 13-year-old boy who was on the autism spectrum. He ended up having a negative event for a similar situation. Also, a 911 call came in New York, where they didn't get all the information to the dispatchers, and they left the police open to having a negative contact with that individual. We need to take responsibility and show that it takes all of us. We can't just call 911 and not give the police officers the information they need and expect an optimum outcome. But I'm pleased to say that the community social action that's happening here in Aurora, they're making a difference in how those outcomes are taking place by the training and so forth they're doing. There are a lot of mothers and people in the community who are concerned about their child, their nephew, their grandson, who may be on the autism spectrum, who may have bipolar disorder or have PTSD, any kind of thing. It may not even be an ongoing diagnosis. Someone could just be having a really bad day, which we all have had, and then having an interaction that will magnify it when it doesn't have to be. Because police officers and law enforcement are here for our benefit, to protect and serve us. We need to partner with them in making their jobs easier. We have the voice, as Kim mentioned, of a mom who kind of got all of this conversation started. So I will turn it over to Katina to talk about a mother's love. Thank
you. Say, you all know how to make someone smile. It is a joy to see each and every one of you here today just because of this particular topic. I know that we are streaming, so for those of you all that are behind the camera, I'd like to use an inclusive introduction just to make sure that everyone is comfortable with me being a speaker and just hearing the information. So I am a Black female. I have long, dark brown braids. I have on a black sweater, a white t-shirt, and I'm standing in front of a room full of people. So, and again, my name is Katina Jenkins, and I am the proud mom of a 13-year-old son with autism. And if we can pull the picture up so that everyone can see. My son, his name is Glenn, and he had some challenges when he was born. He was born at 24 weeks. If he would have been born 1 week prior, they would not have tried to save his life. So he was born, into love, a mom and a dad who we did everything that we could, and I'm still striving to do everything that I can to make sure that he is noticed, and he's noticed in a good way. So when he was younger, I noticed that there was zero eye contact. I noticed that he would not answer to his name. And in my community, when someone calls you and you don't answer to your name, it's like, you don't hear me talking, right? So those were some things that I noticed, but as he started to get a little older, it started to become a concern for me. So because he was so underweight as an infant, there was a group at the hospital that would follow us for 3 years. I think it's called early intervention. And then we had an assessment done. He was diagnosed with autism. Okay, so after I got over my grief of, thinking that his life was gonna go one way and it's gonna go another, all right, I got over that. And I did everything that I could to educate myself on what is autism, what can I do to help him, what services and resources are out there, etc. I was the March of Dimes ambassador family, when he was about 3 or 4 years old. So I really just did everything that I could. But again, when he was in Target and he would have a meltdown, people would say, "Oh, bless his heart." But now when he's in Target and he has a meltdown, it's not cute anymore. He's 13. He wears a size 12.5 shoe. He's in a men's medium clothing. And he's well, when the picture comes up, you'll see he's a lot taller than me now. So if I'm trying to handle him, it may look very different to someone else. And I can't handle him, right? But it does look very different to someone else, right? So when our sorority, as you know, we are very, very open and active in different community events. And I had the conversation with Kim, and I just said to her, it was announced that she was on the Civilians Review Board. Did I say that right?
Close enough.
Close enough. Right? Well, when it was announced that she was on this board, I said, my therapist was telling me, you have to use your tribe. You have to use your community as much as possible. Yes, I am a strong woman, but I also need help. Right? So use your people. So when I found out Kim was on this board, I had a conversation with her, and I was like, Kim, I'm shook. I'm scared now because it's different. The dynamics are very different. My son is really, really big, and when I take him out, he sometimes has sudden movements. If I'm asking him to do something and my adrenaline is going, his adrenaline is even more, it's going even more. He doesn't really understand multiple step directions. Glenn, go upstairs, get your backpack, come downstairs, put your shoes on, get your lunch out of the refrigerator, and let's get in the car. That's way too much for him. So as I'm looking at what's happening on television and the police, having these interactions with folks that have a disability or that has like a mental health challenge, it is very scary to me because he's a cute kid. Cute kid, he is. And you don't know that he has autism until you sit and observe him. And because he's been in therapy all of his life, some of his mannerisms are a little more of those that are neurotypical, but still, he'll make those sudden movements. And I know that may scare someone. Or if you're talking to him, he may not be looking at you. So now you're thinking he's being disrespectful or being sassy, but he's really trying to process. Those with autism, they just process things very, very differently. So when I mentioned it to Kim, she was like, I got you. We're gonna do something, we're gonna talk about this. And that's why I am here today. I do have to say that I really am humbled by how many people are here and how many people actually care. And the information that we share today, I would like for us to just commit ourselves to sharing this information with other people. I know that we have, standing room only right now, but if we could please commit to sharing this information with other people, it'll help somebody. And I think that's what, God wants us to do, is to help other people. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to all the presentations. He's on sale. Anybody want? And for all
that you, Curtis, back there? Wave a hand, make a sign. We're happy to have you here, Curtis. He's a valued member of the Civilian Unity Board. So our next speakers will come from CIT, Crisis Intervention Unit.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is David Guevara. I'm a member of the Crisis Intervention Unit. There are a few of us here from the team. I actually would ask you guys to stand up. They're hiding in the back here.
We're happy to have
So there's we do have a picture to make it easier to see. There's 2 investigators assigned to our unit, and it's myself and then my partner, Katie Young. And then we have the social work component to it. There's 2 police social workers, and that is Bridget Danchin and Alicia Fuentes. There's a social work supervisor, Jeanette Barba, she's here as well. And then we also have Sergeant Pat Camardo, he's in the back there. He oversees our unit on the police side of things. So, and like she said earlier, there's plenty of representatives from the police department that have a really big role on how this unit has come out and how it's functioning now within the community. And today we'll talk about what it is our unit's doing. And a lot of the biggest questions I think a lot of our community members have is the hospitalization of somebody with a mental health concern. How can I get my loved one into getting help? So we'll talk about that as well today towards the tail end. So what exactly is the unit? Again, I talked about our social workers, we talked about the investigators. The investigators come from the police department, and our social workers come from Family Services Association of Greater Elgin. It's a contract that we have with the agency, and they provide social services through the police department. So we have our unit, but they also have plenty of other services through FSA. And they have SAS workers, so those people who do the assessments in the hospital, they might get dispatched from the police department and go. They're also just social workers as well. Mental health, juvenile justice, and we have other crisis-related services through that agency. It's a great partnership that we have. It's a completely separate entity, and they're not just in Aurora, they serve pretty much most of Kane County. So they have their staff that works directly out of our police department. And then you also have some master level interns that come from Aurora University. So you might hear CIU, Crisis Intervention Unit, and that's, again, our investigators that are assigned, our police social work team, and you might hear CIT. Some of you have probably heard of that term before. That's a nationwide term in the police world, Crisis Intervention Team. And the biggest difference between CIU and CIT is our function within our unit is to follow up with people who have a mental health crisis. So when a police officer comes to your house and takes a police report, our team follows up with that family, friends, hospital, whoever we can try to make contact with. And that's what we looked at, is that we get these repeat calls with maybe somebody suffering from a mental health breakdown, and we need to go and try to respond to this crisis. And sometimes we might go to somebody's house 3, 4, 5 times a week. And if something criminal were to happen that's not related to mental health, we have investigators assigned, and we have people that are generally, hey, this person damaged my property. So it goes to a detective, and we're trying to see who is that person that committed that crime. We never really had anybody on the mental health side of things that was like, hey, this person's having a mental health crisis, and we're constantly having 911 calls with this person. Who's following up with that person to see how they're doing? That's what we do. Our primary function within our unit is to follow up with those families or community members that are suffering from a mental health crisis and trying to fill that gap and trying to get them connected with services. And we partner with many agencies to try to make that happen. Now, CIT officers, you can always request one on the street. Unfortunately, there's 2 of us. We're not working all the time. We're not always available to respond to every call. And I will tell you that in the city of Aurora, there are a lot of mental health crises that are happening. It could be more than 1 at a time. There's sometimes 3 to 4 mental health calls going on at a time. But there are plenty of CIT officers. And what CIT is it's a 40-hour course that's held through the state. It's a standard, and it's just specific to mental health. And I'll be honest with you, there's officers that are not CIT certified that do a wonderful job of dealing with these crises, but there are people in particular that you can request that could be an extra help if you're having a mental health crisis and you want somebody to respond with a little bit more training. And so those CIT officers are assigned on the street and there for you to help you out. Just so you know too, we do have a negotiation team. There's a little bit of a difference between our negotiators and crisis intervention unit. So if somebody, let's say, is one of these examples, a suicide attempt in progress, somebody that's barricaded in a house, maybe with a weapon, or there's like a hostage situation, a little bit of a different type of people that we're gonna call. Kaylee is on our negotiator team, so she also has that function as well. But that's just something that probably rises to a little bit of a different level of what we do in our unit. So a negotiator versus crisis intervention unit. So our team functions every time there's a mental health report, and most of the time the way that we're getting reports is usually because it's a hospitalization. So we go respond at a location within the city, and they need to go to the hospital. And they're usually meeting a criteria of being homicidal, suicidal, or too mentally ill to care for themselves. And the state statutes are very clear on when the police are authorized for somebody to go to the hospital. So that's how we generate our reports. If we respond to your house because maybe you're just having a bad day, I'm not doing too well, I want to talk to somebody, but you're not meeting that criteria, we don't necessarily generate a police report for that. If our officers feel like they need some additional support, they can reach out to our team and we will follow up with them. And basically, our team is prioritizing these reports because we do get quite a few. I just checked today to give you guys the most up-to-date number. Since June 12th, which is when 2021, when we first started, hasn't even been a year yet, we've had 973 reports since then. So it's a significant amount of reports in not even a year's worth of time. So we review each one of those reports, we're assessing the priority, and we try to make in-person contacts with that individual who suffered from a crisis or with their family or friends. And then we do co-respond to calls. So if there is a crisis that's happening while we're out in the community, generally we try to respond to those that might be a little bit more severe. And when I say severe, maybe somebody armed with a weapon and looking for a little bit more de-escalation tactics. And also kind of ensuring that when they go to the hospital, we have a great partnership with Mercy and Rush Copley in making sure that person gets the help and reassuring the family that we're working with all those partners to get that individual some help. And just so you guys understand, the co-response model is fairly new, I think, across the country. You don't see a lot of agencies with a mental health professional in the car. And so our social workers are a lot different than some of the other police social workers in our surrounding agencies. They come with us. They're not waiting at the police department. They are in the car. They're responding to calls directly with us so that our officers have access to mental health professionals right then and there if it's needed. And when I say our officers, are also our individuals in crisis and their family members. I can't tell you how many times we've gone to calls and like, you brought a social worker? We didn't know you had that. And so I'm like, this is something that's great where we can try to make sure that people are aware that that is a service that the city provides. And the co-response model is really based on diverting people from jail and also focusing on that de-escalation on scene. I will say, guys, that our officers, and because me, myself, and all the other people that I work with, do a fantastic job of bringing somebody maybe who's here in crisis and bringing them back down. And I would have to say that a lot of times that they do a great job, that our social workers do an awesome job too, but we do not put them in any kind of danger because that's what we sign up for. You know, that's what our purpose is making sure it's safe for them to be able to go in and now provide that mental health support for somebody that's in crisis. So some of our benefits that you might see is that you're decreasing the amount of people going to jail. A lot of times we get calls about somebody screaming, talking to themselves, maybe somebody presenting with hallucinations, delusions. And that's for the average person that's not familiar with somebody that might have a mental health crisis. That's very alarming and disturbing sometimes. And we could arrest somebody for scaring somebody for disorderly conduct. And I think that probably a ways back ago, that's something that was done pretty frequently. And now, when we're recognizing that that person may be suffering from mental illness, such as schizophrenia, we're not looking to have that person jailed. We're not looking to have that person go and get locked up because that's not a benefit to them. And that's not a benefit to anybody. it's a waste of resources, when really we can try to get them diverted and try to get them some mental health help, whether that's getting them connected with psychiatry therapy. And that's what our social workers are great for, because in my realm of things, that's not my specialty. But Hortensia, Bridget, Jeanette, the social work team that we have, they do a great job of doing that and trying to get the families, because they're not aware of the services that are within the community. And the biggest thing is that I think we've all recognized is that these mental health calls are not necessarily a police problem. It's more of a mental health, a health problem. And it doesn't necessarily require a police response. And so our goal ultimately is to get that person to not have to call, the family not to call 911, not to have to call for the police to help. It's more getting them connected to people such as social workers to get them that assistance. And it speeds up that process. It saves a lot of family time and money in some cases, because a lot of times they aren't aware of the services that are depending on their insurance. Again, not the police, all those things. I've learned a lot because of our social workers and how we can give people some better help. And overall, this unit has really partnered with a lot of agencies to try to have this collaborative effort to get people connected. And we really do our best to try to work with a lot of these agencies that are here listed. And I would really have to say that the primary agencies that we work with the most is our hospitals, because we're sending people to the hospital. And I will tell you that one of the biggest frustrations when I first started was when I'd send somebody to the hospital and then they would get released right away. And that's a very common, I think, a common issue that families have is, why is that happening? And I didn't have an answer, because we would come back to their house because we had a repeat call. Now they're back home. Now they're still in crisis. And so we really try to work with Mercy and Rush Copley to understand their process, what they're doing, and what we can do to ensure that this person may stay if they need to stay. And that brings me to kind of talking to you guys a little bit about if somebody does end up getting arrested, we do try to divert them into mental health court if it's appropriate. Unfortunately, it's not up to us. We just make a referral to the state's attorney's office, and then they make a determination on trying to divert that person into mental health services, the judge ordering that versus, hey, you have to go to jail or prison, depending on the crime. So we really have to know that if there is a mental illness, or at least describe the behavior if we don't have a diagnosis, and give that to our state's attorney's office. And that's something as a family member, maybe if you're a victim of domestic battery, and you know that, hey, listen, and in some cases our hands are tied in law enforcement. We have to make an arrest when certain situations arise. But if you feel like this person, hey, they're suffering from a mental illness, that we would like them to maybe get diverted, that's a request that you can make. And a lot of times our officers will recognize that, and we will try to, they'll notify us to make that referral. And like the hospital setting, I think a lot of community members, citizens are very unfamiliar with what happens at the hospital. So I've just tied in a little bit of what that looks like and how they stay there, you know, how our unit works with the hospital to get them there. So when somebody presents as homicidal, suicidal, or unable to care for themselves because they're too mentally ill, that is when they fall into that criteria of hospitalization, where the police officer can say, hey, you have to go. And where some people may say, well, this guy never committed a crime, why is the police fighting with this person? This happens, and unfortunately, and we have to force somebody to go when they fall into that criteria. And so a lot of family members also, my son is delusional, hallucinating. That unfortunately in itself is not enough to send somebody to the hospital. Obviously they're suffering, obviously we want them to get help, but if that person doesn't want to go voluntarily, the police can't force that person to go. And so unless they fall into that criteria, we're only petitioning somebody. Now somebody can voluntarily go, anybody can always send them. Like if you had leg pain and you want to go to the hospital and check yourself in, it's the same thing with mental illness, somebody can do that. And a lot of the issues that we have is the clinical versus legal. And that's why the petition is a legal document presented to the hospital saying, we want you to evaluate that person. They evaluate them, and then the hospital makes a determination of whether or not they're going to keep that person and admit them into a mental health facility. And really, what I probably stress the most to everybody is that petitions are a legal document, it's not clinical. So it's just the police looking at those facts. Do we see that I want to kill myself? I want to kill mom, I want to kill dad. And then, are they able to get forced to go? And then, again, it's not a clinical criteria, so it's not, maybe on a clinical setting, from a psychiatrist, they might say this person definitely meets the criteria to be hospitalized, but on the police realm, it's not enough to force them to go. And that's the biggest issue I think that we have with a lot of our calls for services, maybe people not understanding that our hands being tied. And just as our role as law enforcement, we're assessing the safety and risk to the community. We're advocating for people's rights too, because we can't just, it would be unlawful for us to just take somebody forcefully. And we're really trying to protect everybody and try to create a safety plan for your family if that person has to stay with you at home. And that is all I have for you guys today. If you guys have any questions, I'm open to any questions right now for the team. Any concerns? Yes?
I know that's happening in Aurora. Is this just city by city kind of units that we receive, like you and the CTU, or is that a state?
No, this is just specific to Aurora. We collaborate with a lot of the other agencies around us. Nobody directly around us is doing this co-response at this time. Elgin is the closest. DuPage County Sheriff, I think, has one person doing it as well. But they are looking to make that happen, and we do reach. We have a lot of agencies reaching out to us, looking on how to start a program like this.
CIG officers though are statewide.
Safety officers are statewide, nationwide. Yes.
We're going to take a few questions and then we're going to ask, just in the interest of time, we have cards and we'll ask you just to write them down and we'll take at the end. Yeah, cards, I think just walk down. Just come back. Make a round. Hang on.
Hello everyone.
And then we'll bring up the next one.
I'm Antoinette Gray and I'm an educator, so I would like to know, are you all working with the school systems to help? Because as an educator, I've seen like the misdiagnosis and then the underdiagnosis of our students. And so I'm just wondering, do you all have any partnerships or working relationships with the schools here in Aurora?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have worked with our social workers in these schools. We've met with the teams at East Aurora, West Aurora, worked with Ovanzi, and a lot of those, what makes it difficult is confidentiality, a lot of times with social workers, so we try to work with them as best as we can, but we do reach out to them, they reach out to us. Our school resource officers are our biggest communicators when there's a crisis in the school, and we will work with that school resource officer to try to maybe see if we need to follow up with a family from a student that had a crisis, even if it was outside of school.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're passing out the cards and pens, so just, we don't want you to forget your question, but just write it down so we can move to the next person, which would be our social worker supervisors. Tim Brown, I'll just say Tim.
Thank you all for being here. This is a topic that I am very, very passionate about. I grew up in Aurora, so I feel like this is my hometown, and I also grew up seeing that there was a lot of need in the community with families and everything. Just saw how mental health intersected so much with daily life issues, right? And people not being able to function their best because they're struggling with a mental health issue. And a lot of it is growing up with a lot of families who didn't have those resources, but also just didn't have the whereabouts, the knowing of like, this is actually anxiety or this is actually depression. So they're suffering without even knowing what they could do about it. So I would say I've been very grateful to have Aurora Police Department essentially open their doors for the collaboration of our agency. And they welcomed us in and have just integrated us. And I am beyond impressed by how much collaboration just officers that are even in our unit want to do with us. And what I want to say is this program means a lot because I'm also seeing what it has accomplished. When I was first starting to roll out this program, I wanted to go in the field to see like what is it that the officers are seeing, right? What are they interacting with? Because I've done crisis work, but I've done crisis work as a mental health professional when things have already like calmed down a bit more, right? 20, 30 minutes after the main crisis blow up has happened, because we're not first responders. We come to a scene sometimes way after the fact. So my first glimpse was, wow, like the officers are really dealing with high intensity, high risk individuals, and you know, there is a place for social workers to be part of this collaborative work. Oftentimes the work wants to be separated, like police, you do this, social workers, you do this, which is great, but there is times where you bring them together. And that's why I feel like this model works so well, because you're bringing two people together, multi-professional team, and then coordination with other types of professionals as well. And I would say firsthand, I've seen the difference that it makes to a family when a social worker does show up. Not saying that officers are not good at being able to interact with individuals. There is just something different when they know you're a mental health professional, right? When they know they can talk to you and that you're gonna understand those components of things. Or you're able to give them a resource right there, you know, on scene and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we can't do anything today, you know, because legally we can't force your family member to go and get treatment. But these are some of our options. And guess what? We can check in with them tomorrow if you like. We can drop by the house. I think that's the one also amazing thing that our unit does that I want to highlight is every single day they're out. They follow up every single day with individuals that were just recently in crisis. So we're not, like, they're not sitting in an office just waiting, and they're also not just making phone calls. They are going and knocking on doors, right? Leaving resource information behind, even if they don't make contact, right? So we continuously are trying to work with individuals to really decrease that amount of time that things are being turned over or clients are coming back through 911 repeatedly. And in the short time that we've had the CIU program, it's 2022, so now it's 2 years old per se. I definitely think that we've had a lot of progress, and we have a lot of big goals for this program to continue, you know, expanding and building on the strengths we already do have, which is awesome because we've laid a really strong foundation. And then from here, we definitely know that a team of 4 is great, but as David mentioned, almost 1,000 individuals in need is, the reality is Aurora has a huge need. But I definitely think this partnership has already shown that that this can work, right? And I am just really happy to have this partnership with Aurora Police Department. I'm here to continue having it grow, and if he has any questions, I'm here.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from dispatch. As they come forward, I do want to introduce another member of the board who's with us today, Lily Rocha. You could, another valued member on our board, civilian review board.
Yes.
I'm butchering anybody's name this morning.
My name's Samantha. I'm one of the dispatchers. We are the first people that you contact if you call 911. Some people, when they call 911, are obviously going to be overwhelmed because we have like a laundry list of questions that we need to ask. During high stress moments, people might think we're asking these questions just to be annoying, just to, be nosy. We're not. We are doing this not only for the safety of our officers and our medics, but we're also doing it for the safety of your loved ones. Like Ms. Jenkins said, her son's autistic, might not be recognized right away. We'll ask questions like, okay, do they have any mental health diagnoses? And in this case, she'd say yes. Tell us what it is. You need to tell us what it is. You need to tell your family members. If they have loved ones who have mental health issues, they need to be clear about it. We're not here to judge. We are just solely here to help. If her son had a trigger, we'll ask her that. We'll be like, are there triggers for them? Is there something that we have to very clearly not do, agitate him? We'll also ask questions like, is there things that he likes? We have a couple of autistic children that we go out to quite frequently. One of them loves music. The officers that work in that area now know this. We have some other ones who love the lights and sirens, so they will turn on the sirens, not the sirens, but the lights. But we also have some children who that terrifies them. So we'll ask those questions in this case. When it gets to more of the mental health crises where people are being hallucinating or getting violent or aggressive, our questions get even more in depth. We'll ask if they're getting physical with anyone, if they have any weapons. These are questions that have to be answered. I know it's frustrating, you think we're delaying the response, but while someone is on the phone with you, someone else is dispatching out our medics or our officers depending on the call type. Not one person just doesn't do everything. We have call takers, we have police dispatchers, and we have a fire dispatcher. So everything, we all work as a team, and we're all cross-trained to do it all. This depends on the day of the week of what you're doing. If we don't know that there's weapons involved, or we don't know that they have been drinking all day, or they've been using illicit drugs, or they haven't been taking their prescribed medications, the response can change drastically and very quickly. And all we want is obviously for your family members to be safe and get the help that they need, but also we want to make sure that all our employees go home to their families too, because it can turn very quick. And if there are, even if they don't have a weapon on you, if you're a home that has guns in the, if you're a homeowner that owns guns, we like to know this too. And we'll go even more in depth, be like, are they locked up? Where are they locked up? Does the individual that is having a mental health crisis know the key or have a code? It's a lot of questions. It can be overwhelming. But obviously we're trained to ask the questions to make sure everyone gets the help that they need. And just bear with us. I know it can be frustrating when you're going through probably one of the worst days you've ever had, witnessing one of your family members suffer. But we're just there to make sure that they're ultimately getting the best help that they can. We actually also have another program that we've been working on recently. It's called the SNAP program. It's where people get registered with the police department. I don't know if Sarah Marta is going to talk about it further or not. But you call dispatch non-emergency or emergency, depending on the situation. That's one of the things that we've been questioned about. SNAP programs allow us to have your loved ones registered with the city, and it can tell us what they're diagnosed with, what their triggers are, what will help calm them down. And we can put this in our system based on the name, but we also add these as caution notes to an address. So say you have a permanent address within the city, we can add that so-and-so lives here, they suffer from schizophrenia, this is a trigger, they often have hallucinations. And anytime we go to a call, this caution note will pop up. So as dispatchers, we can automatically try to send a CIT officer if there is one available, or we just warn our officers that are going. Even if the call has nothing at the current time to do with a mental health crisis, as we all know, mental health can change drastically very quickly. So our officers have a heads up and know that, hey, just so you know, someone that might be at the house, this is what they're suffering from, and just be expected that this call could turn out differently. We do this not only just for mental health crises and diagnoses, but also for people that are elderly and have frequent medical calls. We add on caution notes to those addresses also, saying that, we have an elderly female that lives here, she might need further assistance, especially as some people get older, they lose physical capabilities, they're also going to start suffering from dementia. So we have various different types of caution notes that we can add to addresses, just so that way, in case the person that calls can't always give us the full picture, we have a little bit more background, or just so everyone is as safe as they can be, the citizens and our employees. So if you guys have any further questions, that's just a brief overview of everything we do. But
does anybody have questions? Thank you, Samantha. You gave wonderful tips. Are there any questions?
I have a question. For the SNAP program, if this is an incident, let's say a teenager at home threatening suicide, do they get involuntarily entered into that program after that incident, or?
No, but the SNAP program has to be filled out by a family member that wants them to be entered.
Okay.
We don't enter people into SNAP without their permission. Yeah.
We have another question. Go ahead.
So in July with the rollout of 988, how are you preparing for that and integrating that into your current?
988, there's no conclusive details about that yet.
I can speak on that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, so,
Start with what it is.
Yeah, so 988 is, Jeanette, if you don't mind coming up, Jeanette is very much involved a little bit more than we are, but 988 is a new bill that was rolled out, essentially having social workers respond to mental health crises within the community, eliminating police response. If you want to talk about that a little.
Okay. So this is actually something that's coming out of a federal initiative, is that the federal government wanted to put money into mental health responses. So it gave all the states money to be able to use that, and then it's several parts. It's like a crisis continuum, so they are gonna have a call center, and then they're gonna have responders when needed. Their goal is to replace the 1-800 suicide prevention lifeline with the number that families can remember, which is 988. So 988 is going to be the essentially emergency call for mental health issues, right? We're 911, now we have 988. So the state of Illinois, to respond to 988 calls, what they did is they developed a program called 590, and that is mental health providers across the state. It's completely covered across the state for us to collaborate with other partners, but to respond to mental health crisis at the location of the crisis, and provide assessment, crisis de-escalation, linkages to services. It's also focused on deterring calls from 911 that would be more appropriately served by a mental health professional. So something that has a lower risk presented at that moment. Because sometimes families don't know who to call, so they do pick up the phone, 911, and it might not even be something that's completely escalated, but they want help, and it's an easy number to remember, 911. So 988 is that, though, is how it's going to be available. As far as I've heard, it's still set on date for July 16th. And it also does both calling and texting, so we'll have the text feature. And their goal is that 70% of the calls are going to be managed by the hotline, and about 30% is going to go to response for us, for agencies like ours to respond in the community. The great thing is that because our agency is Family Service Association, is one of the 590 contractors for this area, partnering already with the Aurora Police Department. It's helping us already figure out how we're going to collaborate together with our other side of our, like I said, agency unit 590. So 988 will be coming soon. I don't know. I can say more about it, but I'm gonna stop myself.
So
Thank you.
to answer this question a little bit more too, 911, if a call comes in, and an example would be is if somebody is saying that they just needed to talk to somebody, they're not presenting as homicidal, suicidal, remember those kind of qualifications for hospitalization, 911 will divert that to a 988, and that is how then we would not get dispatched, then that 988 mental health professional would get dispatched to that call. That's how it's going to be integrated with 911.
It's following along Bill CESA that essentially describes how that partnership should look like and what steps are coming. So it is a goal to divert some calls to people like us, mental health professionals. Answer.
Thank you. Could take one more question if there is one.
Is that statewide?
Yes.
Okay.
It's nationwide.
Okay, nationwide.
Okay, so more to come on that.
We will be publicizing that at the sorority. I wanted to make sure I got it right.
More information, we will do that. Yes. So thank you so much for that updated information. At this time, we're going to have a presentation or remarks from the Community Oriented Police Unit, Officer Todd Coleman. And You are on the agenda, it's tight, it must be tight. So, you came up to me at a training session. But, you know, so in Aurora, we have community-oriented policing. And so we'd be happy if you could tell us about it. And I went to a training session, I didn't even really know that it existed. So this is how I met Officer Coleman actually too, so very thorough.
Okay, so I'm on the spot. Needless to say, I don't have anything, no slide or anything to follow, but I am a part of the community-oriented policing unit. It's made up of, Aurora is made up of 3 areas. So we have community-oriented policing in each area. I'm on the southwest side, District 5. I want to say that it's comprised of 17 officers, so typically 2 for each district. So you got the chance to meet me in Officer Martinez, who's in District 1. And needless to say, I think that what we end up doing is that we're not beholden to our dispatch calls, so we get to follow up with the community a little bit more than what our patrol officers would. So in helping our crisis intervention unit, when we do get calls in our specific areas, we typically like to follow up with those families as well. So not just for mental health calls, but other calls of service as well too, but building community partners with our civilian review board and other community stakeholders like Thrive. So needless to say, if you guys have any questions in reference to who's in your specific district, we're online. If you go to the City of Aurora website, you can go and find your specific community-oriented policing officer. But if any of you guys have any of my information, I have no issues with directing you to your COP officer if need be. But if I can help you out with anything, by all means, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Officer. We're actually going to try to broaden in our listening tour. The Civilian Review Board is going to do a listening tour throughout Aurora to hear the concerns from the citizens. So more to come on that during that tour as well. At this point in the program, we're going to hear from, and again, I'll just remind, if you have questions, you can write them down, because I've got to ask a question while it's up here. Right now, we're going to hear from our mental health professionals. So, Sarah Gray, take it away from NAMI.
Thank you for inviting me today. I'm Sarah Gray, and I'm honored to be part of this event. I'm the Executive Director of NAMI and APD, the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Kane South, DeKalb, and Condon counties. I'm going to share the wonderful work that we do for free in our community. But before we do, I'm going to share a personal story about a time I had to call 911 for my daughter, who was having a mental health crisis. I also want to state, before I go into my story, that I actually had a positive experience calling 911 and with the Aurora APD. And it was before these programs rolled out. It was a really hard time for me. I was in a crisis with my child who was just entering adulthood, and my daughter was diagnosed with bipolar. So at my house, my daughter was in a mental health crisis, was experiencing symptoms of manic, and I was worried, I was scared that she was going to leave the home and be on the street. And just for self-disclosure, my daughter's African American, and I had seen all these things on the news, and I was scared, like, if she leaves my house, what's gonna happen? I was petrified. So she was acting erratic, and I was just really scared. So a friend of hers, her brother and I, we all blocked all exits, and I called 911, and I was in a heightened state. And I was begging. I was like, my daughter is sick, her treatment plan's in place, but it's not working very well. I didn't know if her medications weren't working. She was taking them because I was giving them to her. And I'm like, but she's not dangerous. She's a sweet girl. I'm not scared. I'm scared what's gonna happen if she leaves my house. Could you help me? And at this time, I was working at Head Start. I didn't have a lot of experience with people with mental illness. I didn't know what to say on the 911 call. I was just a regular citizen having a crisis with my own kid. So luckily for me, unlike some of the stories we see on the news, when they arrived, they were kind to me. They were kind to her brother that was in a panic, and to my daughter. She calmed down. I think she realized the seriousness of it when everybody was in there, when we had like a couple cop cars show in front of our house and with everybody with their uniform. But they started talking to her and asked her if she wanted to go to the ER, and she didn't want to, but then her behavior escalated to the point that they made that decision that she should go to the ER. And so they restrained her. It was really horrible to see as a parent that loves their loved one. And a police officer stayed back and said, "It's gonna be okay, Mom." Patted me on the back. I followed the ambulance to Mercy, and it turned out okay. She ended up being transferred to Lennon Oaks. But it was it's a traumatic experience for the family. It's traumatic for their siblings, or our neighbors came outside. Like, everybody was worried and concerned for all of us, right? I hope this experience can be what everyone in Aurora has when they call. And so one of the things that I'd like to stress is that we need to allocate funding for what we want. And we want these police officers to be trained so that when there's a crisis like this, it's handled safely, right? That's what we want. And so I just want to say how thankful I am to live in a diverse community. That's why I chose it here. I'm thankful for you guys that you're here. I would like to share what NAMI is. So it's about 6 years now, 6 years from that experience. And I retired from being in early childhood and during COVID. And I took a part-time job at the National Alliance of Mental Illness for King. And the Calvin Kendall, we call it NAMI KDK, so if you ever see that, that's what we stand for. Some of the services that we offer is free support groups. No eligibility, you don't have to be diagnosed. It sometimes takes almost 5 years to be diagnosed, sometimes longer. Diagnoses change. So we offer free support groups. They're peer-led. So the Connection support groups is led by someone that's in recovery with mental illness, and anyone can join those. Then we have family support groups, so those are led by parents and caretakers and lovers of people with mental illness. And then we have a BIPOC support group that we started this year, and we have support groups in Spanish. And recently, someone that joined our team that is a veteran. So we're going to have a NAMI Homefront, which is a course. We also offer an 8-week course for individuals and family members that loved one is just having their first experience with mental illness. It's called Family to Family. And so that is free to the community if you're interested in that. I'm hoping to run that course in the fall. We do community presentations. So Ending the Silence we typically do in junior high and high school. We go to the high, and we do a presentation when someone talks about their experience in recovery. And then also someone that's a caretaker speaks. Those are about 15 minutes each, and then he gives some data and some red flag information. And then connection of like, who do you reach out to? Then we do in your own voice presentations, which is from someone that is living in recovery, talking about what this experience has been and ending the stigma. And then we meet with community partners, and they tell us what our needs are, and then we create presentations. So if you are curious about any of our services, I brought different flyers, and I'm happy to field any questions. And again, yes.
So thank you for coming. I think I remember you.
I recognize your face, yes.
Yeah, so can you tell the folks in the room, because as a member of the African American community, I know sometimes, different communities see mental health differently, but can you address if there's a support group for African Americans or people of color that meet, once a month, something like that? So yeah.
Yes, I have a flyer for it. So we actually have a BIPOC group, and it's led by someone part of the community, and it's a safe space. And then also for the Spanish. We also do 2 new initiatives. Sharing Hope is an actual 3-part video series for the Black community that different community partners that have volunteered to be part of that process lead it. So the presenter is from the Black community, and then the whole audience and everybody that participates, so that it's a safe space. And Compartiendo Esperanza is the same. So it's led by somebody from the Latinx community, and then the community members are all from the community. The 3 topics is youth, family, and community leaders. And so that they're both sister programs. Did that answer? Okay. Yes.
So when you mentioned NAMI, you said DuPage, Kendall, Kane, but there are some of us who live in Aurora that live in Will County. So do we have access to these services?
Yes. First of all, I don't have any boundaries, and you'll find that each NAMI has its own unique community. So not every NAMI is going to have a BIPOC, or not every NAMI is going to have Spanish, right? So we have people downstate. I've even had family members come from different states. There's 20 affiliates. So usually, so we're Kane, DeKalb, and Kendall, NAMI DuPage, and then there's the Urban Club, there's Metro Chicago, there's a group that I refer to a lot is Barrington, because they actually have an LGBTQIA group. And so, I mean, I just want to speak from experience that it's really helpful when you have a safe space where you can talk and not be judged. And so we recognize that it needs to be peer-led from people from the community for that. So I'm happy to give what I have today.
Can people from Will attend?
Yes, it's virtual right now, so there shouldn't be any problems with that.
Any other questions for Sarah? In the back.
Yes.
You mentioned this community about bringing families together to help them learn about their family members' mental health issues. Can anyone from any age come in and learn about that thing? Like this group, this intervention group,
the family
from little
family
kids
groups?
to elderly, grandparents, things like that.
Yes. Most of our support groups are 18 and older just because of the responsibility, but we do where we go in and do topic conversations at clubs for youth. A common theme that we have in the family to family is that someone that is approaching retirement may have their loved one return home to be cared for. So and the concern is what happens to that loved one when I am no longer able. So that's a common theme, right? So all ages are part of that. I just completed a class through April and May that I taught, and the demographics were all over, from someone attending about their parent that they help take care of, or siblings, their child, so it's for everyone that is a caretaker.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. So now I'm going to call on Suzanne Williams, who is a member of the Glen Ellyn Area Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She is a speech and language pathologist.
So I'm Dr. Suzanne Williams. I'm a clinical assistant professor at DePaul University in a new graduate program in speech and language pathology. And I also have over 20 years of experience working in the public schools. So I've worked significantly with social workers and other staff members at the school level, specifically working with children with developmental disabilities or developmental delays and intellectual disabilities and disorders. So what I'd like to just briefly, I can talk a lot on this stuff. Just briefly, some words that, some major nuggets, some highlights to just kind of think about as we're all here today is when, you look at the news and you look, and we're all aware of certain cases that we've seen on the news. and you later find out, oh, that child was on the autism spectrum. Well, first and foremost, when you meet an individual on the spectrum, it's just that. You've met one individual on the autism spectrum. Every child is so different, and every adult is different that presenting with autism. So I lead with that because the nuggets, as I'll call them, that I'm going to leave with you today, you can apply to all individuals on the spectrum, okay? Just to different degrees, but to keep in mind those general pieces. So when we talk about language specifically, there are three components. There's your receptive language, that's your comprehension. There's your expressive language, that's what I call your verbal output. And then there's the, and Katina talked so eloquently about it, the eye contact, okay, and the body language. We call that the pragmatic, so the social use of language. So when we think about those areas that are significant things to remember when interacting with someone who presents on the autism spectrum or with an intellectual or cognitive impairment, one of the main pieces is to, when you're asking them to follow a directive, keep it simple. Okay? The bottom line, keep it simple. Keep it real simple. So, as you put it, Katina, instead of going through 3, 4 directions, give them one direction. Okay? And you might have to repeat the direction. And with respect to an interaction that could occur, when you give them that one interaction, pause. Instead of stand up, take your shoe, get your coat, go to the door, keep it real simple and truncate your language quite a bit. The pausing is really important because it allows the individual time to process. And that pause and that time may seem like the person isn't hearing you, isn't listening to you, but actually they are. We want to respect that, as we know that is really, really important, and it can change the entire dynamic, period. The second piece, when we talk about language, I'll talk a little bit about the expressive component. When individuals on the spectrum may communicate with you, they may be verbal. Their verbal language or their expressive language may again be, it may be real simple. Think of very simple sentences. I go to the store, okay? Instead of, I'm going to go to the store and buy blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. So individuals interacting with citizens on the spectrum and intellectual disabilities, they may be able to interact verbally, understand that the language that the person may produce will be very simple, very truncated, or they may be nonverbal. And when they're nonverbal, it could be a myriad of things. So you're looking at, they might present signing to you, they might sign to you. So real simple signs, you know, hello, goodbye, thank you, wait, would be important to those working with citizens on the spectrum to familiarize themselves with what some of those basic signs would be, those basic functional signs. Because 9 times out of 10, the individual that is not verbal will use some of those signs. Organic, so there may be very few, or they may not be as clear and crisp as you normally would produce them. But if you had an idea, that could certainly help you through the interaction. And then the other piece, when we talk about expressive language and the nonverbal individual, would be they may present with a picture book or some type of picture system. Otherwise, when it's augmentative communication or PACS, picture exchange communication system. Okay? It might be a very fancy one, or it might be something as simple as this piece of paper here with pictures. Okay? There are also very eloquent and very sophisticated augmentative communication devices. They may have an iPad with them, and so they may use the iPad with the different programs that have been logged onto their system to communicate to you. And in doing that, again, giving that pause time for that individual it takes time They have to figure out what they want to say, process it in their brain, and then take the time to actually go to the different pages, if we're talking about a PEC system, go to the different pages, pick out what it is that they want to say. And in the heat of the moment, tensions are high, you might miss something, and they might miss something as well. So keep those pieces in mind, the relevant information. And then the last area that I spoke about was that pragmatic use of language, that social use of language. So that deals with the eye contact that hopefully I'm getting all of you today, as well as any body language that you may have, okay, or that the individual may have. So as that relates to, let's say, an interaction with the police officer, as they're talking and the police officer is trying to look at them, keep in mind that individual may not look at you with eye contact. And it's not I'm not hearing you, it's just they're trying to process, emotions are high and things are happening quickly. Okay? That would be the first thing. There may be also some body language. You know, they may turn their body away from you, from the speaker. Again, it's not on purpose, so keep those things in mind. And then the other real piece to it too that I forgot to talk about, which kind of falls under expressive language too, but a little bit into the social language, is that children and adults on the spectrum, with respect to, how can I say it, keeping it simple with the language, no sarcasm, being very, very concrete, very literal. So all the idioms in the world that you may love to use, and I talk idioms a lot, and I have to remember when working with my caseload, my students, that I'll throw out some idioms and then they'll look at me like, well, what was that? Why did you say that? So because we do it automatically, right? And so again, in the heat of the moment, the heat of the interaction, the officer may say something, you know, they may not understand, it may escalate to an entirely different level, and it didn't need to get that far, and didn't need to get there, period. So keeping it very, very literal for them, truncating your language, understanding, pausing is very, very important, as I said. And when in doubt, you know, giving them that time to process. They may also have echolalia. Echolalia is, it can be immediate echolalia, and that's just basically essentially they're repeating something right after you said it. Get out of the car, please, get out of the car, please. We need to be aware that they're not being defiant. It's helping them to process the interaction. It's helping them to process the directive that the officer might have just asked them, okay? There may also be an instance of, that's immediate echolalia that I just told you about. There may be delayed echolalia, where they may say something from 2 weeks ago, something that they say a word and it triggered something else, and they're saying that. But to the officer, they may not know that. So that, you know, that could also make the situation go a different way. So when keeping those things in mind. And at the bottom line of it is just be mindful of all of these things, and one step at a time, keep that language real simple, and communicate very, very, you know, comfortably with them, and approach them comfortably. Okay? Make them feel comfortable as well. So I think I kind of summed it up quickly.
That's wonderful, Dr. Williams. And actually you added to the discussion today, because we wanted to have a two-way discussion, so I really appreciate that. That's that personal Soror. Are there any questions for Dr. Williams?
Quick question. One of my members does have one of those, did you call it an augmentation system?
Augmentative communication?
Yes. I was trying to get one for another member who is nonverbal. Where would the mother order that? Does she go to the doctor, or is there a specific website?
How old is the individual?
He is like 25.
Oh, wow. I would
The
start.
one who has one initially, he has one that looks like a laptop with the picture, and I was sitting there with him while he was using it. His mother, you know, was there too. He was just pointing to the different things, but she can read his body language. The other one, he just likes to play video games, a whole different member. He doesn't have one, but I want him to have one.
Oh, absolutely. Great question. So usually children that are, just to give us a little bit of background, children that are as young as 3 can get services. Well, before they're 3, they get services with the Illinois Early Intervention Services. And then that's an initial starting point, would be with the Department of Human Services. And then as they get older, then when they become 3, they're eligible for services in public schools. So that's another avenue to pursue. A lot of times you can work with school districts, and they have lender devices that they can lend to the student to use while they're in the school district. And then once they leave the school district and they go to a high school, that's a different district. Then we would have to do the whole piece again. And then the tricky part does get when they become older, beyond that 18 years of age. You can consult your insurance company. Sometimes insurance companies will assist you, not all the time, but depending on which insurance company you have. And then if you're able to tap into any, there should be some state, at the state level, but it's depending upon state to state. Resources sometimes are more plentiful than others, but I know if you start at the state level with the Department of Human Services, you might get something in order they can guide you as to where to go, and then within that there are different agencies within the state. There's one that I'm blanking out on it, but there are different service organizations, service facilities that will assist you in working with your insurance company and then going on to get the advice. Of course, as I want to tell you, I can't think of it. But you just, do a little Google research on that.
Okay.
Definitely.
She has no.
Yeah, then she should say, oh, she can start right there. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Do we have questions that were written down, or any questions about anything that we haven't answered?
Anybody have anything written down?
So yeah, question for Chief Police. So when I was at U of I in Champaign, I did something similar where we had a specific function where the police department met with folks who had autism. So it was basically like a meet and greet. So a chance to kind of get to know folks, get to know the department. Fair warning, it was like 300 people. Then to the point that you mentioned about the calls, there was an increase in calls once people got familiar with it and became comfortable with interacting with police. What are the thoughts you have about that? What are your thoughts about that? Hosting something like that, considering budget, personnel.
No, that's a great idea. The more people we can reach, that we can share this information with, the better off everybody's going to be. That's why I appreciate the fact that the people we have in the room came. I know it's about maybe 40 people in here, but if we can give that information to 400 people or 4,000 people, I think it's going to make our community safer and better. So it's a great idea. We can work on the logistics of it, because like you said, it sounds like a huge undertaking. Maybe you can help us put it together. But it's a great idea. The more we can educate people, the more we can educate our officers, better off everybody's.
Because I was surprised by the numbers. Like I said, 900 and something in just the first 6 months, 6 months of the year.
No, that is since June 12th of 2021.
Okay, so it has been not quite a year.
It hasn't been a year just yet. We're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's part of the impetus for this program too, because I attended that training where I heard those numbers too. So we're so happy that we were able to do this partnership today. Anybody else have a question or anything else we need to cover?
Let's pass out the survey.
Yes,
Before I ran out.
complete the survey.
If you didn't get a survey, I do have index cards that you can answer the questions on, because we're really trying to get community feedback to know if you feel like this was something that was beneficial, if it's something that we can try to duplicate, maybe have it here again, maybe join in with the chief and this idea about having people do a training.
And the board is planning to do more of these throughout the community. And also, of course, love to get the survey results back. I'm sure you'll share them, Soror.
I will.
I come as one and I stand as 10,000. And more, actually. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Do you know what percentage of APD's budget is going towards the crisis unit?
I'm going to direct that to
I
you.
don't have that.
Does anybody know that?
To be honest,
Okay.
I probably can try to get it, but I don't know exactly.
Okay.
That's a good question, though, because obviously I think there is a budget directed to it, which sometimes I think that's not the case in other jurisdictions. So, and a real commitment, I would say that. So maybe that's something we could follow up on?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Thank you so much, Chief Cross. Anyone else?
I have a question. For the amount of calls and incidents that they have throughout the years, are there enough social workers and staff to meet the demand?
I'm gonna take a while. I guess they can use more. Does somebody want to speak to that?
What was the question?
The question is whether you need more social workers and more staff to work in view of the number of calls that you've had?
I would say yes. You know, in a perfect world, we would have a lot more officers and a lot more social workers to devote, because we are the second largest city in the state. And as we all know, just from this presentation, this issue is very prevalent, not just in Aurora, but all over the place. So our hope is to try and expand that as we get more police officers. Right now, to be honest with you, there's a shortage of police officers all across the country. And this is probably one of our top priorities right now is recruitment, to try to fill our ranks, because we have a lot of people who have retired and left the profession. We have to fill those spots, but it hasn't been easy lately. So as we continue to get more officers in, we'll spread our resources out, and our hope is that we can expand our crisis intervention.
Well, how about social workers as well?
Social workers as well, and I'm sure that, you know, again, they are not our social workers. They work for Family Services of Elgin, but I'm sure they would provide us more resources. We have a partnership. As we continue to expand, I would hope that they would provide us more social workers, since we have such a great relationship. So we're working towards that goal, but great question.
Thank you.
I just have to give Chief Cross another shout out. We have new leadership here. I understand you have an announcement.
Hello, everybody. I'll stand up, I guess. I'm Natalie Bonner. I'm a proud member of the Glen Ellen Area Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. I'm also the founder of Talented 10 Social Services, which is a nonprofit organization here in the community. We're actually located right down the street, 213 North Lake Street. So if you know where Save-A-Lot is, you look across the street, that's where we are. And we're actually having our first Fox Valley area mental health resource fair. So there are a lot of other mental health resources right up the street there. There are bags of fresh produce from Loaves and Fishes, a lot of them. So please, if you know of anyone in need, if you need some, please go down there and grab them. The event is until 2 p.m. today. That is the announcement.
I think I've acknowledged everybody on here on the board today, except for Principal Gibson, who snuck in on me back in the back. Another valued member of the Civilian Review Board. Well, thank you, everyone. I just can't thank you enough. From the police department to the Deltas here today, my Sorors, to NAMI, to, and oh, I forgot about Kim from AID. Where are you, Kim? But do you want to say anything, or? I'm acknowledging, because I could get that mic back to you. So, thank you to all our partners. Thank you to everyone who came out to support us on our first activity. You give us encouragement. Thank you so much. It's the program.
Have your surveys, either leave them at the table or hand them to me on your way out. We'd appreciate the feedback.
We need to take some photos to document. And also, let me just